The sun beat down on dusty Oklahoma. Billy, all elbows and knees at 13, helped his pa mend fences. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest. Pa always said, "Honest work builds an honest man, Billy." Billy aimed to be just like his pa, strong, kind, and fair. They lived a simple life, their small ranch nestled beside the Wichita Mountains. Days were filled with chores, fishing in a creek, and Pa's stories of the Old West. Evenings were spent on the porch, Pa playing his harmonica while Billy watched the fireflies dance. Their ranch wasn't fancy, just a small house, a barn, and enough land to graze a few cattle. But it was home. It was all Billy had ever known and all he wanted. His ma had passed when he was little, leaving behind only a locket with her picture inside. Pa always kept it safe, but sometimes when Pa wasn't looking, Billy would sneak a peek, trying to imagine what she was like. Billy was wiry and quick, good at climbing trees and tracking animals. Pa was teaching him how to shoot, how to hunt, how to survive in the wilderness. A man needs to know how to take care of himself, Pa would say, handing him the rifle. He handled the weapon with a reverence beyond his years, knowing its power and responsibility. Life wasn't always easy, but it was good. They had each other, and that was all that mattered. He had a good dog and a loving father. He wanted nothing more in life than to continue sharing his life with the both of them. Little did he know that peace was about to be shattered, his innocent childhood about to be ripped away, leaving him alone with nothing but a rifle, a locket, and a burning desire for justice. The shattering of that peace came swiftly, brutally. A rider, a stranger, appeared on the horizon late one afternoon. He was dressed all in black, a shadow against the setting sun. Pa squinted, his hand shading his eyes. "Don't recognize that brand," he muttered, more to himself than to Billy. The rider approached at a slow, deliberate pace, the only sound the rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves. He stopped just outside the fence, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. "Afternoon," he drawled, his voice rough and gravelly. "Afternoon," Pa replied, his tone cautious. "Can I help you?" "Looking for a man," the rider said, his eyes glinting in the fading light. "Name of Johnson. Might be a few Johnsons around these parts," Pa said, his hand instinctively moving towards the rifle leaning against the porch. "You'll have to be more specific." The rider chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "This Johnson owes some people money. They ain't too happy." Before Pa could respond, the rider drew his gun. The shot echoed through the valley, ripping through the quiet evening. Pa crumpled to the ground, a crimson stain spreading across his chest. Billy screamed, a raw, animal sound of pure terror and grief. The rider didn't hesitate. He spurred his horse forward, firing another shot into the air. "That's for keeping bad company, Johnson," he yelled before galloping away, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. Billy rushed to his pa's side, his hands trembling. Pa, wake up!" Tears streamed down his face as he desperately tried to stop the bleeding. But it was no use. Pa's eyes were glazed over, his breathing shallow and ragged. He looked up at Billy, his lips moving. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. He clung to his father's lifeless hand, tears blurring his sight. As the initial shock began to subside, a cold resolve settled over him. He couldn't bring his pa back, but he could make sure the man who did this paid the price. He remembered Pa's words, "A man needs to know how to take care of himself." Billy knew what he had to do. He had to find the killer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows, Billy forced himself to his feet. He had to be strong for Pa. He began to search the area, his eyes scanning the ground for anything the killer might have left behind. The ground was mostly dirt and dust, but something glinted near where the rider had stood. It was a playing card, the Queen of Spades. It looked worn and dirty, like it had been carried for a long time. It seemed an odd thing for a killer to drop. Billy picked it up, turning it over in his hands. On the back, barely visible beneath the grime, was a faint drawing of a skull. He didn't recognize it, but something told him it was important. Then, he remembered something else. As the rider had turned to leave, Billy had noticed a small, distinctive scar on the horse's flank. A brand, almost but not quite. It was shaped like a crooked lightning bolt. He hadn't paid much attention to it at the time, but now it was burned into his memory. The Queen of Spades and the lightning bolt scar. Two clues, two pieces of a puzzle. He clutched the playing card tightly in his hand, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. He didn't know who this man was, but he would find him. He would track him down, and he would make him pay for what he had done. Pa deserved justice, and Billy would make sure he got it. He carefully placed the playing card in his pocket, a grim reminder of his vow. The decision to leave wasn't easy, but Billy knew he couldn't stay. Every corner of the ranch held memories of Pa, memories that now felt like sharp knives twisting in his heart. Staying would only prolong the pain, would only allow the killer to get away with his crime. He worked quickly, driven by a desperate urgency. He packed a small bag with dried meat, some biscuits, and a canteen of water. He grabbed Pa's rifle, the weight of it familiar and comforting in his hands. He knew how to use it, knew how to hunt, but the thought of actually using it against another human being made his stomach churn. He found Pa's old map of the territory, its edges worn and faded. He spread it out on the table, his finger tracing the lines of the roads and rivers. He remembered Pa mentioning a town called Redemption, a lawless place known for attracting outlaws and drifters. If anyone knew about a killer with a Queen of Spades and a lightning bolt scar, it would be someone in Redemption. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze falling on a locket Pa had always kept safe. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the delicate carving on the front. Inside was a tiny picture of his ma, her smile bright and loving. He remembered Pa saying, "She's always watching over you, Billy." He carefully placed the locket around his neck, tucking it under his shirt. It was a reminder of the love he had lost, and a symbol of the strength he would need to carry on. He took one last look around the cabin, his heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. He couldn't stay here, haunted by the ghost of his former life. He had a promise to keep, a debt to repay. He grabbed his bag, slung the rifle over his shoulder, and stepped out into the darkness, leaving behind the only home he had ever known. The dog whined softly, watching him go. "Stay," Billy whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Stay and protect this place." He couldn't risk taking the dog with him. It was too dangerous. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silent night. A lone figure heading into the unknown, driven by grief and a thirst for vengeance. The first few days were a blur of exhaustion and sorrow. Billy walked relentlessly, following the faint trail that led towards Redemption. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the nights were cold and lonely. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and the weight of the rifle felt heavier with each passing mile. He rationed his food carefully, knowing he had to make it last. He drank sparingly from his canteen, finding water whenever he could in small streams or puddles. He slept under the stars, using his saddle blanket as a makeshift bed. Every rustle of leaves, every hoot of an owl, sent shivers down his spine. He missed Pa terribly. He missed his stories, his laughter, his strong, comforting presence. He missed the warmth of the cabin, the smell of wood smoke, the simple routines of their life. He clutched the locket, finding solace in the image of his mother's smiling face. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving. The rolling hills gave way to scrubland, dotted with thorny bushes and prickly cacti. He saw vultures circling overhead, a constant reminder of the fragility of life. Once, he stumbled upon the carcass of a deer, picked clean by scavengers. The sight made him sick to his stomach, but he knew he had to be strong. He couldn't afford to be weak. He faced challenges he never imagined. He had to cross a swollen river, the current threatening to sweep him away. He had to fend off a rattlesnake, its venomous fangs bared. He learned to read the signs of the wilderness, to find food and water, to navigate by the stars. Despite the hardships, Billy pressed on, driven by his unwavering determination. He knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous, but he refused to give up. He owed it to Pa to see justice done. He would not rest until the killer was brought to account for his crime. He drew strength from his memories of his father, from the love he carried in his heart, and from the burning desire for revenge that consumed him. He knew Pa would be proud of him. Just when Billy thought he couldn't take another step, when his body screamed in protest and his spirit threatened to break, he saw it, a small, dilapidated shack in the distance, a faint wisp of smoke curling from its chimney. Hope surged through him, a warm flicker in the cold darkness of his grief. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the rifle. He didn't know who lived there or whether they would be friendly, but he was desperate for help. He knocked tentatively on the wooden door, the sound echoing in the stillness of the afternoon. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing an elderly woman with kind eyes and a weathered face. She wore a simple cotton dress, and her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked at Billy with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Lost, child?" she asked, her voice soft and gentle. Billy swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'm heading to Redemption." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Redemption? That's a long way for a boy your age to be traveling alone." I have to get there," Billy said, his voice trembling. He hesitated, then decided to confide in her. "My pa, he was murdered. I'm going to find the man who did it." The woman's expression softened with sympathy. She reached out and took Billy's hand, her touch surprisingly strong. "Come in, child," she said. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a good night's rest." Billy gratefully accepted her invitation. The shack was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and welcoming. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the room. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, offered him a bowl of stew and a piece of cornbread. It was the best meal Billy had had in days. As he ate, he told Martha about his pa, about the murder, about the Queen of Spades, and the lightning bolt scar. Martha listened patiently, her eyes filled with compassion. When he was finished, she said, "Redemption is a dangerous place, child. Be careful who you trust." She paused, then added, "I've heard whispers about a man who calls himself the Spade King. He's a ruthless outlaw, known for his cruelty. And I've heard tell of a horse with a lightning bolt brand, belonging to one of his men." Billy's heart leaped. The Spade King. That had to be him. He thanked Martha for her kindness and her information. He knew now that he was on the right track. He was one step closer to finding his father's killer. Martha insisted Billy stay the night. She gave him a warm blanket and a soft pillow, the first comfort he'd known since his pa's death. He slept soundly for the first time in days, his dreams filled with images of his father and mother, of open fields and clear streams. But even in his sleep, the shadow of the Spade King loomed, a dark premonition of the dangers to come. He awoke before dawn, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Martha had already started the fire and was preparing breakfast. They ate in silence, a comfortable silence born of shared understanding. Before Billy left, Martha pressed a small pouch into his hand. "It's not much," she said, "but it's all I have. Some dried fruit and nuts, and a little bit of silver. It might come in handy in Redemption." Billy thanked her profusely, his heart filled with gratitude. He knew Martha couldn't afford to give away her meager possessions, but she had done it anyway, out of the kindness of her heart. He promised himself he would repay her someday, if he ever got the chance. As he prepared to leave, Martha gave him one final piece of advice. "Trust your instincts, child," she said. "They won't lead you astray. And remember, even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Don't let the darkness consume you." Billy nodded, his resolve strengthened by her words. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer alone. He carried Martha's kindness with him, a beacon of light in the gathering gloom. He hadn't traveled more than a few miles when he heard it, a low growl, followed by the snapping of twigs. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. A pair of yellow eyes gleamed in the underbrush. A mountain lion, large and menacing, stepped into the path. Billy knew he was in serious trouble. He had heard stories of mountain lions attacking livestock, even people. He stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. The mountain lion crouched low, its muscles tensed, ready to pounce. It was a fight for survival. Billy remembered what Pa had taught him about mountain lions. Don't run. Stand your ground. Make yourself look big. He slowly raised his arms, tried to appear larger than he was. He yelled, his voice cracking with fear, "Get out of here! Shoo!" The mountain lion remained crouched, its eyes fixed on Billy. It let out a low growl, its tail twitching back and forth. Billy knew he couldn't back down. He had to be brave for Pa. He slowly reached for his rifle, his movements deliberate and cautious. The mountain lion seemed to sense his intention. It let out a deafening roar and lunged forward, its claws extended. Billy reacted instinctively. He raised a rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the trees, startling the mountain lion. The bullet struck the ground just in front of the animal, sending up a cloud of dust. The mountain lion hesitated for a moment, then, apparently deciding that Billy wasn't worth the effort, turned and disappeared back into the underbrush. Billy lowered the rifle, his body trembling with adrenaline. He had never fired a gun at a living creature before, and the experience had shaken him to his core. He knew he had been lucky. If the mountain lion had been more determined, or if he had missed his shot, things could have turned out very differently. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He had survived another challenge, but he knew there would be many more to come. He continued his journey, his senses heightened, his eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of danger. As the sun began to set, he came across a small cave. He decided to make it his camp for the night. He gathered some firewood and started a small fire, grateful for the warmth and light. He ate some of the dried fruit and nuts Martha had given him, savoring each bite. He knew redemption was still several days away. He knew the road ahead would be long and perilous. But he also knew that he couldn't give up. He had a promise to keep, a debt to repay. He would not rest until he had brought the Spade King to justice. He looked up at the stars, their light twinkling in the vast expanse of the night sky. He felt Pa's presence beside him, guiding him, protecting him. He was not alone. He would survive. He would find a killer. He would make him pay. Redemption lived up to its reputation. It was a dusty, lawless town filled with rough-looking men and women. Saloons lined the main street, their doors swinging open and closed, spilling out loud music and drunken laughter. Billy felt a knot of fear tighten in his stomach. This was a dangerous place, but he couldn't turn back now. He walked down the street, trying to look confident, his hand resting on the rifle. He entered the first saloon he came to, the Rusty Spur, the air thick with smoke and the smell of whiskey. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for any sign of the Spade King or his men. He approached the bartender, a burly man with a handlebar mustache and a suspicious look in his eyes. "Excuse me," Billy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for someone." The bartender eyed him up and down, his gaze lingering on the rifle. "Who ain't?" he grunted. "This here's redemption. Folks come here looking for all sorts of things." "I'm looking for a man called the Spade King," Billy said, his voice growing bolder. The bartender's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "You got business with the Spade King, kid?" "He killed my father," Billy said, his voice trembling with anger. "I'm going to find him and bring him to justice." The bartender let out a harsh laugh. "Justice? And redemption? You're in the wrong town, kid. The Spade King runs this place. Nobody crosses him and lives to tell the tale." Billy refused to be intimidated. "I'm not afraid of him," he said, his voice firm. "I just need to know where to find him." The bartender hesitated, then shook his head. "I ain't saying nothing. You best leave it alone, kid. You're just asking for trouble." Billy tried asking others in the saloon, but they all gave him the same response: fear and silence. Nobody wanted to talk about the Spade King. He was starting to lose hope. Maybe Martha was wrong. Maybe the Spade King wasn't here. Just as he was about to give up, he noticed a young boy sitting alone at a table in the corner, nursing a glass of milk. He looked about Billy's age, but his eyes were old and wary. Billy approached him cautiously. Maybe, just maybe, this boy would be willing to help. He sat down. The boy looked up with suspicion. "What do you want?" he asked. "My name's Billy," he said, extending his hand. The boy hesitated, then shook it briefly. "I'm called Dusty," he replied, his voice low. "I'm looking for the Spade King," Billy said, getting straight to the point. "I heard he's here in Redemption." Dusty's eyes widened, and he glanced around nervously. You shouldn't be talking about him, he whispered. He's got ears everywhere. He killed my father, Billy said, his voice filled with grief and anger. I need to find him. Dusty studied Billy for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said, You're just a kid. You can't take on the Spade King. I have to try, Billy said, his voice firm. My pa deserves justice. Dusty seemed to be considering something. He took a sip of his milk, then said, I know where he is. Billy's heart leaped. You do? Where? You got a hideout in the hills outside of town, Dusty said. It's called Devil's Canyon. Nobody goes there. How do you know? Billy asked, his suspicion rising. My pa. He used to work for the Spade King, Dusty said, his voice tinged with bitterness. Before he disappeared. Billy understood. Dusty's father had likely crossed the Spade King and paid the price. He could see the pain in Dusty's eyes, the same pain he felt in his own heart. I can help you, Dusty said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know the trails in the hills. I can show you the way to Devil's Canyon. Billy hesitated. Could he trust Dusty? He was just a kid like him, but he also seemed genuine, driven by his own desire for revenge. He remembered Martha's words, trust your instincts. He looked into Dusty's eyes, and he saw a flicker of hope, a spark of defiance. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. Okay, Billy said, extending his hand again. Let's do it. Dusty gripped his hand firmly. Meet me behind the livery stable at dawn, Dusty said. And be careful. Someone might be watching. He slid out of the booth and quickly darted out the saloon door. Billy smiled to himself. He finally had an ally. Billy left the saloon and made his way to a cheap rooming house on the edge of town, trying to blend in with the shadows. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He double-checked the rifle, ensuring it was loaded and ready. He barely slept, tossing and turning, his mind racing with thoughts of the Spade King and his father. As dawn approached, Billy slipped out of the rooming house and made his way to the livery stable. Dusty was waiting for him, his face pale but determined. Did anyone see you? Billy asked. I don't think so, Dusty replied. But we need to hurry. They started to walk towards the edge of town, keeping to the back alleys and avoiding the main streets. Suddenly, a gruff voice called out, Hey, you too. Hold it right there. Billy and Dusty froze. A large, menacing man with a scar across his face was walking towards them, a pistol in his hand. Billy recognized him as one of the men from the saloon, one who had given him a particularly nasty look. What do you want? Billy asked, trying to sound braver than he felt. The boss wants to have a little chat with you, the man said, his eyes glinting with malice. About your interest in the Spade King. Billy knew they were in trouble. He had to think fast. He looked at Dusty, then back at the man. We don't know what you're talking about, Billy said, then shoved Dusty forward. Run. Dusty hesitated for a moment, then took off running, darting down a narrow alleyway. Billy turned and faced the man, raising his rifle. Stay away from us, he shouted. The man sneered and raised his pistol. Billy fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the quiet morning. The man flinched, giving Billy a chance to turn and run. He sprinted down the street, dodging barrels and crates, the man close behind him. He could hear the man's heavy footsteps and his angry shouts. He reached a wooden fence and vaulted over it, landing with a thud on the other side. He found himself in a maze of narrow alleyways and backyards. He knew he had to lose the man, or they were both dead. He sprinted into the maze. He looked back and saw the man stop and aim the pistol once more. Billy ran faster. He had to get away. Billy managed to lose the man in the maze of alleyways, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't stay in town. It was too dangerous. He had to find Dusty and get out of Redemption. He made his way back to the livery stable, hoping Dusty would be there. He waited anxiously, scanning the street for any sign of danger. After what seemed like an eternity, Dusty emerged from the shadows, his face pale but relieved. Are you okay? Billy asked. Yeah, Dusty said. I lost him, but we can't stay here. They know we're looking for the Spade King. I know, Billy said. We need a plan. They huddled together, trying to come up with a strategy. Dusty knew the area around Redemption like the back of his hand. He knew the hidden trails, the secret passages, the best places to hide. Billy, on the other hand, had his father's rifle and his determination. Together, they might have a chance. Devil's Canyon is heavily guarded, Dusty said. There's only one way in, and it's always watched. Then we'll find another way, Billy said, his voice firm. There's always another way. Dusty thought for a moment. Then a glimmer of hope appeared in his eyes. There's a back entrance, he said. A secret passage that leads into the canyon. My pa told me about it, but he never showed it to me. Can you find it? Billy asked. I think so, Dusty said. It's hidden behind a waterfall about a mile from the main entrance. It's a long shot, but it's our only chance. Then let's do it, Billy said, his resolve strengthened. We'll sneak into Devil's Canyon, find the Spade King, and bring him to justice. They decided to travel by night, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the shadows. Dusty led the way, his knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. Billy followed close behind, his rifle ready, his senses alert. They knew they were walking into danger, but they were determined to see their plan through. They would use the element of surprise to sneak into the canyon. If they got caught, they would fight. They had nothing to lose. The Spade King would have to answer for his crimes. After a treacherous hike through the darkness, they found the waterfall. The cascade of water roared down the cliff face, obscuring the entrance to the secret passage. Dusty led the way, carefully navigating the slippery rocks. They slipped and slid, soaked to the bone, but they pressed on, determined to reach the other side. Finally, they reached the entrance to the passage, a narrow opening hidden behind the falling water. They squeezed through, finding themselves in a dark, damp tunnel. They followed the tunnel for what seemed like hours, their footsteps echoing in the silence. At last, the tunnel opened into a large cavern. Torches flickered on the walls, casting eerie shadows. In the center of the cavern, seated at a table surrounded by his men, was the Spade King. Billy's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He raised his rifle, his hands trembling but his resolve firm. Spade King, he shouted, his voice echoing through the cavern. I'm here to avenge my father's death. The Spade King looked up, his eyes narrowing. He recognized Billy instantly. Well, he said, his voice smooth and menacing. If it isn't the little orphan, I was wondering when you'd show up. You killed my father, Billy said, his voice filled with rage. Your father was a fool, the Spade King said, his eyes glinting with malice. He knew too much. He was getting in my way. What did he know? Billy demanded. The Spade King laughed. He found out about my plan to take over Redemption, he said. He threatened to go to the authorities. I couldn't let that happen. So you killed him? Billy said, his voice trembling with anger. It was necessary, the Spade King said, shrugging his shoulders. Business is business. He didn't deserve to die, Billy shouted. Nobody deserves to die, the Spade King said, his voice hardening. But sometimes it's the only way. He slowly rose from his chair. It's a shame it has to end like this, kid. You got guts, I'll give you that. But you're out of your league. He reached for his gun. Now, it's time for you to join your father. Billy was ready for the final showdown. Billy raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. He could feel the rage coursing through his veins, the burning desire for revenge. He wanted to pull the trigger, to end the Spade King's life, to avenge his father's death. But then he hesitated. He remembered his father's words. Honest work builds an honest man, Billy. Would killing the Spade King make him an honest man? Or would it make him just like the man he hated? He looked at Dusty, who was standing beside him, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. He knew Dusty wanted revenge too, for the loss of his father. But was revenge the answer? He lowered the rifle slightly, his mind racing. He remembered Martha's words, "Don't let the darkness consume you." Was he letting the darkness consume him? Was he becoming the very thing he was fighting against? The Spade King was still reaching for his gun, his eyes fixed on Billy. He knew he had to make a decision, and he had to make it fast. He could kill the Spade King, end his reign of terror, and avenge his father's death. But what cost? He thought of his mother, her smiling face in the locket. What would she want him to do? He knew she wouldn't want him to become a killer. She would want him to find a better way, a more just way. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling. He looked at the Spade King, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pity. He couldn't kill him. He couldn't become a murderer. "I'm not going to kill you," Billy said, his voice firm. "But you're going to pay for what you've done." The Spade King looked stunned. He had expected Billy to kill him. He had prepared himself for death. But this was something he hadn't anticipated. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to turn you in," Billy said. "I'm going to let the law decide your fate." The Spade King laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "There is no law in redemption, kid. You're wasting your time." "Maybe not," Billy said, glancing at Dusty. "But there are people who want justice. People who are tired of living in fear." He turned to Dusty and said, "Go get the sheriff." Dusty hesitated for a moment, then nodded and ran out of the cavern, disappearing into the darkness. Billy turned back to the Spade King, keeping his rifle trained on him. "It's over, Spade King," Billy said. "Your reign of terror is finished." The Spade King's men shifted nervously, unsure of what to do. They were used to taking orders, not making decisions. They looked at their leader, waiting for his command. But the Spade King remained silent, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and resignation. He knew he was defeated. He knew his time was up. It wasn't long before Dusty returned, leading a group of armed men, including the Sheriff of Redemption. The sheriff, a grizzled old man with a stern face, looked at the Spade King with disgust. "You're under arrest," he said, his voice booming through the cavern, "for the murder of John Johnson and numerous other crimes." The Spade King didn't resist. He knew it was futile. He allowed the sheriff to handcuff him and lead him away. As the Spade King was being led out of the cavern, he looked at Billy, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won, kid," he said. "This isn't over." Billy just shook his head. It was over. The Spade King was finally going to face justice. The sheriff thanked Billy and Dusty for their help, promising to bring the Spade King to trial. He knew it wouldn't bring back Billy's father, but it would bring some measure of closure. The Spade King was arrested and taken to jail. The citizens of Redemption were free from the tyrant. The sheriff gave Dusty a big hug. "Thank you for your help, son. You are a true hero," said the sheriff. The sheriff went on to say, "I have friends and connections in the law, so I will do everything in my power to make sure he is tried and punished to the fullest extent of the law." Dusty smiled and thanked the sheriff, happy that the Spade King was going to be arrested. Billy felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had brought his father's killer to justice, without sacrificing his own morality. But he also knew that the emotional scars would remain. He would never forget what had happened, but he could finally start to heal. He looked up at the night sky and felt his father's presence and guidance. He knew he had done the right thing. Dusty decided to stay in Redemption. With the Spade King gone, he felt a sense of hope for the future, a chance to rebuild his life. He wanted to help the sheriff bring law and order to the town, to make it a safe place for everyone. He said goodbye to Billy, a newfound friend, with a promise to never forget their adventure. Billy returned home, his heart heavy but his spirit strong. The journey was long, but the closer he got to the ranch, the lighter he felt. The Wichita Mountains welcomed him with open arms. When he finally arrived, the dog ran out to greet him, barking and wagging its tail, overjoyed to see him. Billy knelt down and hugged the dog tightly, tears streaming down his face. It was good to be home. He walked into the cabin, the familiar scent of wood and earth filling his nostrils. Everything was just as he had left it, a testament to the life he had shared with his father. He went to his father's room and sat down on the bed. He picked up his father's harmonica and started to play a sad, slow tune. He knew things would never be the same. His father was gone, and a part of him was gone too. He was no longer the innocent boy who had lived a simple life on the ranch. He had seen the darkness, faced the danger, and made a difficult choice. He was changed forever, but he had also learned valuable lessons. He had learned the importance of courage, determination, and compassion. He had learned that revenge was not the answer, and that justice was always the best path. Most importantly, he had learned that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. He reached into his shirt and touched the locket, feeling the smooth surface against his skin. He opened it and looked at his mother's smiling face. He knew she was watching over him, proud of the man he had become. He closed the locket and put it back around his neck, a reminder of the love he had lost and the lessons he had learned. He picked up his father's rifle and walked out of the cabin, his head held high. He had a ranch to run, a life to live, and a future to build. He was ready. He looked up to the sky and said, "Thank you, Pa. I will never forget what you have taught me." He was no longer a boy, but a man.